How does the unconscious affect our lives? Welcome to today's live. I'm your host, Vicky Newham, and today we're going to be delving into the murky world of the unconscious. And this may be something that you thought about before. Let's just dive straight into thinking about what the unconscious is. Well, this is a term that's been coined by many people. And the way that Sigmund Freud used it was he talked about the what he called the dynamic unconscious. And so Freud said that we have a number of very complex ideas and thoughts and impulses and desires and feelings out of conscious awareness. And he called it the dynamic unconscious because he said that although these things, these thoughts and feelings and impulses, we're not consciously aware of them, he said that, and many people believe this, they still motivate behavior. They still prompt and drive our actions and also our feelings. And there are a number of different categories, so we're going to look at a few of these today. And do let me know if these ring a bell. So we're going to start off looking at what Freud called unconscious conflicts. Now, Freud said that our mind, some people talk about it in terms of our personality or our psyche. Freud said that it had three parts to it. And so this is our ego and our id and our superego. And well, starting with the id first of all. So the id then is the part of us that's controlled by impulses. So it's the part of us which is subject to quite sort of basic desires. And it's governed by, you probably won't be surprised to hear, the pleasure principle. And so that's the id. Then we have the ego, and the ego is the part of us which is rational and sensible and reasonable. And the ego is controlled by what's called the reality principle. And then the third part is the superego. Freud sort of referred to this as the our sort of sense of morality. So the part of us that is concerned with, you know, what's right, what's the right thing to do, and you know, doing the decent thing and the right thing, and morality. And so the reason why Freud talked about unconscious conflicts is because he said that we are constantly subjected to the conflicting forces and drives and desires and wants and needs of these three parts of us: the id, the ego, and the superego. And well, depending on who I'm sort of talking to and teaching, I explain it in different ways. But if you think about, so like, you know, with the A-level students that I used to teach, if you know, I'd say to them that, you know, if your mate got the newest iPhone and your id might be prompting you to, oh, I want that. Why don't you just nick it? You know, they won't notice. And then your the ego part of you would be saying that, you know, you can't do that. And you know, logical. Let's think about this. You can save up, and you know, perhaps you can get a part-time job, and you know, look for an offer when it's on special offer, etc. And your the superego, you know, is going to be on your shoulder, saying, it's not nice, you know, we don't steal things, he's your friend. So the id, ego, and superego then are constantly in conflict, and I quite like that. I find it quite an interesting way of thinking, oh gosh, it just must be my id, ego, and superego in conflict again. So that's one of the first aspects then. Another area is what Freud called defense mechanisms. And we talk about these very commonly, in sort of in English, everyday talk anyway, with sort of, oh, you're just being defensive, or, etc. And so Freud said that these conflicts between our ego and superego constantly, create anxiety. Well, as you'd imagine, really, if you've got all this going on constantly. And so he said that our mind, our psyche, employs defense mechanisms to defend us, to protect us from anxiety. And so these are things like, the key one in psychoanalytic terms is repression. And so this is where things which are distressing for us and upsetting, disturbing, make us feel scared, etc., that we repress those, or our mind, rather, it's not something we have conscious, it's that word again, control over. Our mind represses them into our unconscious. And so they're kind of pushed, if you like, kind of out of sight and out of mind, rather out of conscious awareness. But they nevertheless, as I mentioned at the beginning, still continue to affect what we do, what we say, how we feel, what we think, and what we believe. So repression then is one of the key defense mechanisms in psychoanalytic terms. And then you have others, like, for example, you have denial. And that's pretty much the way that we talk about it, in kind of, everyday life, really. If we deny the existence of something or other, then, we are literally pretending to ourselves that it doesn't exist. And you can see how, what I find really interesting about defense mechanisms in sort of psychoanalytic theory is that, you can really see how actually they do, to an extent, they do work. They do protect us from anxiety, because if we pretend that something doesn't exist or isn't going to happen, that we're scared about, it can allay some of the anxiety. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem at all, which is why when defense mechanisms are used to excess, or over a prolonged period of time, or as a habitual kind of coping mechanism, when we need to face up to things, obviously they can be counterproductive. So we also have then displacement. And so this is where we displace our emotions onto something or someone else. So then if we're annoyed about something or other, then, we might come home, or we might go to work or get to a shop, and then we snap at someone else, that's, I think, kind of a good example of that. Another interesting one is what's called reaction formation, and this is where we kind of we pretend to think and feel in ways that are actually completely the opposite of what we do feel. So this is where we say, no, I'm completely cool about that, completely cool, it doesn't bother me at all. And this can be about a person or a thing, or an action or a belief system, or whatever, pretending that you feel the absolute opposite of what you do. And so intellectualization is another one. There are numerous of them, but those are some of the interesting ones. So the other thing I was going to mention about unconscious factors, and what else do we have then in this our dynamic unconscious? Well, there are lots of thoughts and ideas that we have that we are simply not aware of. And so it might be that, when we act in a certain way and we don't understand why, then that what's motivating our actions is that we've got some beliefs going on, and we've got some thoughts, circulating, which are outside conscious awareness. And it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to tap into these. This is why psychoanalytic therapists, sometimes use things like dream analysis and hypnosis to try and access what it is that we're thinking and believing. And so, to give you an example, it may be that if you have a belief, for example, and this is something that you've kind of grown up with, but you're not aware of it, but perhaps you have problems showing how you feel, expressing your feelings of, showing that you're upset about things or that you care, or showing that you're angry about things when you are, or annoyed, etc. And you just don't understand where that comes from. Well, it could be that, you have grown up with the belief then that, you mustn't show any weakness. You've got to be strong, or you've got to look after others, or you've got to protect others, or we mustn't upset X person, Y person. And so that could be a belief. So it's almost like a rule that I must not show weakness. And then thoughts and ideas are kind of sort of subcategories that sort of mushroom off, if you like, from that belief. So a thought that might stem from the belief that I mustn't show weakness, could be, or they won't like me. I've got to pretend that I don't mind, or they'll reject me if I really show how I feel, and I'm honest about it. Then they'll reject me, or they won't like me. And you can see how, obviously this is a huge topic that I'll go into more on another day, but you can see how if you have, beliefs, whole big, machinery of beliefs going on that are outside of your conscious awareness, so which you can't tap into, but yet they still affect your behavior, then you can see that, this is a really big thing. And this is why there's so much interest, a lot of misunderstanding as well about the unconscious, but why there's, so much interest in it and what it is and how it affects us. And so another area then that I was going to mention is that we can often learn things. There are a number of ways in psychology that we learn things. And so obviously we're just going to look at sort of the psychoanalytic side of things today. But if you grow up with, beliefs that are outside of conscious awareness, then another example can be about things that are seen as being kind of desirable and acceptable. So this is about in terms of behavior. And so another one could be, or an example could be that we don't talk about things. You don't talk about things. We can't be honest. And so, if this is kind of what develops then, and quite often this happens, for example, as a sort of a family norm, that that's what's encouraged, that's what's seen as desirable, to pretend everything is okay, and to not be honest about, what you're thinking and feeling, then, what's desirable and what's acceptable, this can kind of enter into, at a very young age, if it's a habitual way of being within the family, or because something happens, then we can learn that as well. And it's also something that exists, just sits outside of our conscious awareness. And so I was thinking of an example of, so say when you were growing up, somebody in the family died. So someone passed away, and for whatever reason, it wasn't dealt with very well in the family. So the family didn't cope. So, you were a child. So, say that you did have two parents, for argument's sake, your parents didn't cope well, or it could even be one parent, who died even. If it's not dealt with in a way which enables us as children to be able to process what we're feeling, to understand all those feelings and where they come from and how they can make us want to act and sort of lash out and things like that, then what we can learn is that, we have to repress, we cannot show, we have to repress a lot of the sort of so-called, ugly, difficult, complex feelings. So things like, very obvious things when someone dies, of, grief and, just raging loss and rage and fear, about what's going to happen, and I don't understand what I'm feeling, and why did this happen, and what's going to happen in the future, and all of those things. If all of that gets repressed into the unconscious, the dynamic unconscious, it can have a really, really big effect on how we feel, and also our actions and our behavior. So I've got some tips really for you, and these are things that you can reflect on. So they're tips for reflection, also for discussion, and also for journaling, if that's that's what you like doing. So first of all, then, so number one, do you sometimes experience emotions, or you behave in a particular way, and you just don't understand why? You don't know where it's come from at all. You can't seem to pin it down to a particular thing. You just don't understand it. So that's number one then. And it's really interesting to look at, although you might not know where it comes from and what it's about, then sometimes if we really, really sit with things and kind of really, really ask ourselves, what is this about? And as you're journaling, then that can really, release this sort of flow of, stream of consciousness. And we can begin to, unravel some of these things. So that's number one. Then number two is, can you relate to the idea of this tripartite psyche? So this three-part personality or mind of the id, impulses, the ego, reason and logic, and the superego, so our sense of morality. And can you relate to the idea of these three parts of us being in constant conflict? So number three then is, which of the defense mechanisms do you recognize? We all use them all the time. So, it's not a sign of kind of pathology or abnormality at all. So do you have one that you use quite commonly, to as a kind of coping mechanism? Well, this is exactly what they are. And then fourthly, what rules did you learn when you were growing up? And so about what's desirable and what's acceptable. So were there any rules in your family about we must do this or we must not do that. And so another way of kind of getting in touch with those is, were there times or are there times when, somebody, or could be people in your family, get kind of, they're very pleased by a particular behavior, or they get very annoyed by it. So a couple of key takeaways then, just before we draw this to a close. And first of all, I just want to say that we all are subject to unconscious factors. So these, thoughts, beliefs, ideas, impulses, etc. Some are in our conscious mind, so we're aware of them. But the ones that are in our unconscious mind, we all have them. And so I just want to say that, please be reassured that if you're thinking, oh gosh, I've got quite a lot of that going on, it's all part of being a human being. And so it doesn't mean that, you're kind of, there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong, that you're doing life wrong, that you're making a mistake or any of that at all. But and as I said this, yesterday, it's always useful to think about, okay, so, I'm aware of this now. I seem to use denial, or I seem to use reaction formation as defense mechanisms quite a lot. So I'm going to look out for this and see if you can kind of bring awareness. So that's how we draw things out of the dark. We can, by shining a light on them. So draw them out of our unconscious into the light. And so, and then I was going to say that a really useful question to ask yourself is, if you are aware of a particular belief that you have or something that you do, is to ask yourself, is this bringing me happiness and fulfillment? And if it's not, then, you have some, some choices there. So one of my favorite expressions is, if it's not working for you, if it's not making you happy, then you can choose, you can ditch it, or you can switch it for something else that will make you happy. So that's the end of this little session today. I just wanted to mention very briefly that if you would like to know more about the role of unconscious factors and how they affect our happiness and fulfillment and our lives, then my free online workshop actually has a whole session on this. And so you can enroll for that. The link is on my website, which is vickynewham.com/courses. So that's it for me today. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.